Good morning. We look today at Judges 9 and 10. And this is one of the times, especially when the Israelites turned from God. And in chapter 9, there isn't even mention of God, of the Lord Most High, or, really a reference to God at all. What it starts out with, it says, Now Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's kinfolk. And just back up in verse 31 of chapter 8, it says, this is talking about Gideon. His concubine, who was in Shechem, bore him a son and named him Abimelech. And so, very intentional of the writer to say that this concubine, a slave girl, not a wife. Gideon had several wives. He had 70 sons. He must have had more than one for sure. But this Abimelech was, really I don't know how to say it for sure, but a disinherited son. He wasn't one who would inherit anything from Gideon, really. And, the people had said to Gideon, let you and your sons and your grandsons rule over us. And so here they kind of get their wish, or their request, because Abimelech seizes power. He goes to his mother's people in this area of Shechem and says to them, support me and I will be the leader. And, he says, what is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal, Gideon, rule over you, or that one, me, rule over you? Somebody that someone of your own kinship, And, they say, well, yeah, it would be great. It would be best for us to know the one who is going to lead us, So they raise him up and they follow him because they say, as it says in the Bible here, verse 3, he is our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the temple of Baal, an idol. They gave him 70 pieces of silver out of an idol of a temple from a false god. And, it says that, and with that, Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. Sounds like a gang war to me. It sounds like, the underworld coming to be, worthless and reckless fellows. People of ill repute, people that have no scruples, will go to any length. And so what happens next? He goes to his father's house, and it says, and he killed his brothers, all the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men, it says, on one stone. He killed them all at the same time, so that there wouldn't be any contest amongst them, the sons of Gideon, to be the ruler. This is something that a tyrant would do, something, no person with any common sense would do. How insecure would he have to be to do that? To know basically that, number one, he had no right to this leadership role. He didn't have the training for it or any of that. It was out of greed. And so often we find that in the Bible. It says, verse 6, then all the lords of Shechem and all of Beth Millo came together, and they made Abimelech the king. And then in the next verse, verse 7, it says, when it was told to Jotham was the one son of Gideon who escaped the death of all of the rest. And he was one of the younger sons, but he stands up on the top of Mount Gerizim, and he calls out, and he makes a plea. He tells his story about the trees. Once went out to anoint a king, and they looked for the olive tree, who was a noble tree bearing good fruit. And he says, no, I got to go about my business. And they look at this other tree and this other tree, and they all say, and the vine, we have our appointed lot. We're supposed to bear grapes. We're supposed to bear olives. We're supposed to bear figs. And this is what we're going to do. And then they go to the bramble, basically a useless bush that, more of a weed than anything. And appoint the weed the king. And of course, Jotham is saying about Abimelech that, the least worthy one has appointed himself king. And he kind of announces that they're, a curse, and about it that way, and in verse 15 especially, it's, and the bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you're anointing me, come take refuge. If not, let fire come out of the bramble and destroy it, and this comes back, later on. But so he says, if you've acted in good faith and honor, and you've dealt well with Jerubbaal and all of his sons, then may you be blessed and everything that way. But, you have risen up against my father's house. You have killed his sons, and you have made Abimelech king, and then verse 21, Jotham runs away to hide. I mean, he's the only other surviving son, basically to say the legitimate son of Gideon, of Jerubbaal, as he's, got the two names here. But he runs away and hides for fear of his brother. And then it says Abimelech ruled for 3 years. And you think about what these 3 years must have been like, under this tyrant, under this person who didn't know God, who didn't acknowledge God, who was in it for himself, and then, verse 23, I mean, this is an indicator of it's not going to go well. It says, but God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the Lord's, and it dealt treacherously with him. I mean, God wasn't pleased with what Abimelech did, and it says he sent this evil spirit, so that there was division, there was, discontent. I mean, it wasn't a good situation for anybody involved in the whole thing. But yet, verse 26, when this Gaul is going to try to bring an uprising, others come to Abimelech's aid and set an ambush for Gaul, and Abimelech is successful in driving him away. And these things happen that way, and it's just, I mean, but it's an example of how sometimes evil people can get others to, think that, they are the way, the truth, and the life, as Jesus is, and only Jesus is. But yet, they promise so much, and people will elect them because of the promise, because of a free handout, because of whatever, and it just doesn't turn out well. But a couple of times, Abimelech is successful in routing an army or a people who have come up against him, until he comes to Thebez in verse 50. And he took the city, but there was a tower within it, and a woman dropped a millstone from the temple top, and it dropped on Abimelech's head, and he knew he was about to die. And he says to one of his soldiers, draw your sword and kill me, so that it won't be said that a woman killed me. I died at the hands of a woman. What a horrible thing, I mean, what more did he deserve, really, than a coward's death? And he didn't deserve any acclaim, and so here we have a whole chapter, I mean, almost 2.5 pages in my Bible, talking about this evil man, Abimelech, who led the people of Israel away. And the last thing in verse 9 is, God made all the wickedness of the people fall back on their heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham, the one, talking about the trees seeking, a ruler. And it's kind of like the axe that comes to all the trees in the forest and says, elect me your leader because I am one of you. I have a wooden handle. And I mean, what does an axe do? It cuts down trees. And, we're one of you. And this is what Abimelech had said to the people of his mother's country. Chapter 10, then it starts out on a positive note. After Abimelech, Tola, son of Puah, son of Doda, a man of Ishkar, lived and rose to deliver Israel, and he judged for 23 years, and then he died. And so when it says, they lived in peace and harmony and blessing of God for these 23 years. And then after him comes Jair, the Gileadite, who ruled for 22 years, and he had 30 sons, and they had towns, and they was another time of goodness and God's blessing. So they had 23 years under one and 22 years under another. And then verse 6, after this second person died, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, worshiping the Baals. And So they have a good leader and gets them back in the grace of God, and things are going well, and then boom, things fall apart again. And I mean, we see that in our world, how a country is led in a good direction by a leader, and then that leader dies, or a coup comes in or whatever, or someone else comes to power through whatever sources, and things go from good to worse, and this is what happens again for the Israelites. They worship all of these false gods, and they abandoned the Lord, it says. They did not worship him in verse 6, and then verse 7, the anger of the Lord was against Israel, and he sold him into the hands. I mean, he let these other nations run rampant over them. And then finally, verse 10, Israel calls again to the Lord, we've sinned against you. And the Lord said to these Israelites, reminds them, didn't I take you out of Egypt? Didn't I lead you? Haven't I been faithful? And then he throws it in their face. He says, go cry out to the gods you've been worshiping and see if they can help you. He's saying, you have rebelled against me. You have ignored me. You have worshiped these other gods. Let these other gods help you if they're so great. And of course, it doesn't happen. And we end chapter 10 with, kind of with that, God throwing the Israelites' unfaithfulness in their faces. And I read these books in the Old Testament of the history of the Israelites, and I just, you shake your head and you want to whap, what's wrong with these people? They don't get it. But then I wonder, are we any different today? No matter what, God is faithful. God blesses us. God watches over us. And, he is our God. And I rejoice in that. And I hope you do too.